It was hard raising two children on my own. Losing Emma took the excitement out of it. I found myself resenting them, even blaming them for what had happened to her. I hated them, but I hated myself more for feeling this way. It's not what Emma would have wanted. I neglected them and buried myself in work as a way of distracting myself from losing her. I think this is why they turned out the way they did. It was around this time John and I started the investment firm Moore & Wesson. We provided loans to up-and-coming entrepreneurs and were making money at a rate beyond anything I'd ever imagined. At the outbreak of the First World War, John and I decided to enlist. The things that were happening across Europe, how could we do anything but join? The twins were old enough to live without me, so I sold my shares of the company, left them both with a small supply of money and gold, and hoped to never see them again. John had mastered the art of forging documents and created fresh identities to use after the war. The horrors of war quickly came back, but this was completely unlike the Crimean War. We spent months in trenches unable to advance. Constant bullets and explosions rained overhead. Your ears would constantly ring from the blasts, and an uninterrupted night's sleep was unheard of. Many of the young men I shipped with died horrible deaths. I don't know why I, who by this point had lived a full life, and who at times wanted to die, survived. But life is strange like that. When the war was nearing its end, John and I faked our deaths and returned to America. I moved to Chicago and John moved to California. I was going by Joseph at this time. It seemed like a nice way to honor Emma. Moore & Wesson had become a national bank by this point. There are branches in most cities across the country, and would you believe it, there right at the front, above the counter in every branch, was a picture of John and I. People often commented that I looked just like William Moore, and I'd always reply that he's old enough to be my father. I was reading a newspaper sometime in the early 1920s when I saw George and Charles there on the page looking back at me. I still remember the headline of the article. War heroes and sons of William Moore start their own bank. Their bank continued to grow throughout the 1920s, becoming one of the top banks in New York. Their names became household names, and I wouldn't even hazard a guess at the money they were making. But there was something else I noticed when I saw them in the paper. Something worrying. They looked exactly the same as the day I left them. Young men approaching their 20s, not adults aged by life and war. I knew instantly they had used the Ankh. I wrote to John asking if he knew about this, and he agreed to look into it for me. The guild had a way of knowing when an Ankh was duplicated, and it turned out that my Ankh had been duplicated in 1913. The guild made contact with them the same year, and they were inducted before the war started. knew I had a responsibility to reach out to them. I was nervous, afraid they would hate me after running away. But knowing they had joined the guild meant they would at least understand. John and I flew to New York in February of 1929. We made an appointment to meet them at their huge office in Manhattan. The conversation was tense. They were upset that I kept the guild from them, that I ran away to maintain the secret. And even though I tried to explain the burden of being in the guild and the real cost of the Ankh, they said it should have been up to them to decide if the cost was too high. That stripping them of that choice was selfish. Perhaps they were right, but I knew since they were young children that the power of the Ankh would corrupt them. They were the sort of people the Ankh feeds on. He spent the rest of the day eating and drinking. The best chefs in New York catered to our every need. We drank wines and champagnes that cost more than most people earned in a year, even a lifetime. George and Charles had chosen a life of opulence. They wore it well, as if they had always been part of the elite. I asked how they knew about the Ankh. It turned out I hadn't been as good at keeping secrets as I thought. They discovered some of the correspondence I had over the years, and, of course, weren't entirely blind to the fact I hadn't aged. They found the Ankh one day while I was asleep and duplicated it. I should have done more to keep it secret, but how do you keep a secret like that from your own family? They had joined the guild together, and the guild gave them a second Ankh so they wouldn't have to wait 5 years to both be under its sway. I don't know how they passed the test. They must have lied through their teeth. After conversation moved on from the guild, they told us about their business, how the loans they were creating were basically worthless. They were making money at the expense of the people using their services. They told us that something big was coming. John and I already knew that the guild were extremely powerful. But it wasn't until this conversation I realized just how powerful and pervasive they were. All of the top bankers in the country were guild members, and a great many of them had already been corrupted by the Ankh. The market, they said, was overvalued and a crash was inevitable, but unpredictable. So they were taking measures into their own hands and were going to crash the market in September. The sell-off had already started at a small scale, but by September the sell-off would be massive. The moguls had already started shorting their stocks, and while the rest of the country would plummet into an economic depression, wealthy guild members stood to make unprecedented amounts of money. The sell-off would present a unique opportunity to buy stocks in almost any industry at the lowest price they had been in decades. With the widespread adoption of cars, the ever-increasing demand for flight, and the film industry entering a period of boom, there were so many industries to take advantage of, and so much money to make. John and I were shocked. We implored them to reconsider and warned them of the effect that would have on ordinary people, but they wouldn't listen. We spent weeks devising ways to stop the ploy. Countless hours spent arguing with the guild, begging them to do something. We weren't surprised to find out that it was the crows behind the plan. Nor were we surprised to find out the twins had joined the faction. We were, however, surprised to find out just how powerless the guild was to stop them. Realizing the crash was inevitable, John and I did all we could to mitigate the impact. The loan company we had started some 15 years earlier was now a national success with a huge number of employees. The owners were still the same ones we sold to back in 1917. I sent a package to them telling them the stock market will collapse imminently, that there was nothing they could do to stop it, but that they could limit the impact on the company by selling their investments and leaving the stock market. A few days later, I saw an article that Wesson and Moore had sold some of their ventures. They called it a restructuring.